All right. Good evening, everyone. It's CJ, and here today with W and James. So, W and James, welcome back. W, James, glad you got to join tonight. We just thought it was very important to do this special Rogue Money Radio broadcast, just with the events unfolding. I don't want to take up, all of our listeners' time, so I just want to jump into it, guys. So, welcome to Rogue Money Radio. What's going on, guys?
Well, why don't you, if you want to dive in first, James, that's fine. My main point here is that this is not something we didn't expect, and I don't mean just this week. We've been talking about this here at Rogue really since before Trump became president, that there were events that were going to be percolating in the background that were going to have to come to a head. This isn't going away. And even this action right now today is certainly, probably, almost certainly not the end. It may be, desired to be the end, and President Trump has telegraphed his willingness to everybody, remain calm and let's get back to business. But the other side of the coin is that we have now shown that we're willing to ramp this up as much as necessary to get to some kind of resolution. So this opening salvo, if you will, has been a long time in the making, and at this point does not involve Hezbollah or Hamas or Iran directly. This is targeted pretty precisely at just any potential capability of Assad for chemical weapons, allegedly.
James, go for it. I know, James, you started messaging early in the evening saying that there was some chatter going about, and I think you were one of the first ones to call it, saying the president was going to be doing his special live speech at 9:00. So what are your thoughts? Go for it.
Yeah, well, thanks for that introduction, W. And yes, we've had the discussions, so this audience knows, by telephone extensively for the last few weeks about the build up to this and would it happen, would it not, would Trump back off at the last minute, or would there be some sort of deal? The Israeli media, some of those outlets were reporting that there was supposedly a deal that Iranian units were going to withdraw from Syria in return for either very limited strikes or no strikes at all. That was supposedly being negotiated with the Russians. I don't really buy that. I think it was more of a matter of they were deconflicting in the lead up to this, and we saw some pushback from Secretary of Defense Mattis reportedly insisting on a more limited strikes package, along with the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joseph Dunford, who is in charge of the deconfliction with his counterpart, Russian Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov. And what we've seen so far is no evidence that any installations where Russian forces were present were struck. We also don't believe, as W said, that any Iranian units have been hit. However, that doesn't what's happened tonight does not preclude the Israelis from striking other Iranian-related targets in the future. And some of the so-called administration or officials in the Pentagon are leaving the door open for additional strikes, even though we know General Mattis said in his press conference tonight that this is a one-time deal, that they don't intend to strike Damascus further tonight, as of tonight. So, just so this audience knows, I just want to reiterate that W and I, we've talked a lot about this. We don't necessarily agree on all the various scenarios, but we agree on the general picture of a let's call it a deep state pressure on the president to push him down a path towards gradual escalation and greater involvement in Syria, despite, I think, genuine instincts to try to pull back and to pull U.S. troops out. And definitely, I don't think President Trump wants to end up like George W. Bush, having American servicemen getting hit by improvised explosive devices and mortar rounds, rocket rounds, and various insurgent ambushes. Because right now we have 2,000 American troops spread across eastern Syria, mostly east of the Euphrates River, in the areas that are controlled by the Kurdish self-defense forces, so-called SDF, which really just has some Arab fighters as a fig leaf, and not that is actually Kurdish.
Can you mute? Sorry.
Yeah, primarily Kurdish manned. And those groups are not going to be able to protect American forces. I believe Mattis and certainly John Dunford is aware. If Iran and Hezbollah decided to hit back and hit back hard, I don't think American forces can prevent casualties. You know, they've got some forward operating bases that are a little more than just collections of sandbags and, you know, some blast walls against vehicle-borne IEDs or suicide IEDs. In places like Tanf, you know, where it's a slightly bigger base, but it's still right out there in the middle of the desert, close to the where the Syrian, Iraqi, and Jordanian borders meet. I mean, I think American troops are extremely vulnerable to that type of retaliation if Hezbollah and Iran were targeted hard. And by the way, Hezbollah had already pulled back in the days before the strike, and certainly weeks, to Lebanon because of the threat of a conflict with Israel. And therefore, it seems to me that a lot of effort was put into minimizing the casualties on the Syrian side. The Russians were using all of their signals intelligence and certainly whatever they were getting from the deconfliction line to try to move Syrian Arab Army, you know, forces and air defenses out of the way and put as much of the Syrian Arab Air Force at Khamamim and other Russian bases as possible to prevent them from being destroyed on the ground. So it doesn't look like the Syrian Air Force has taken much of a punch tonight. And in fact, the bases that were hit were mostly around Damascus and were said to be facilities associated with potential chemical weapons production. But again, there's no evidence that any of these facilities actually were making chemical weapons. It's just, you know, the claims of the administration, which, as we've seen, there's a reason that they decided to do it tonight, not just because it was Friday the 13th. I'm sure W can get into the numerology in a minute, but also because Moscow had called out their bluff and basically said that I think we were just joined by Ken Shortkin Jr., so I want to say hello to him.
Hey, welcome, Ken.
Yo.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining, and to all of our fans in the chat room, we see you're very welcome for going live tonight. This short minute notice, but we just felt it was that important. I want to start a little bit with Trump's speech that he gave at 9 p.m. You know, most of the time that he is live, he is very well put together, very confident in his delivery. And to me, when I watched him speak tonight, when he was talking about the actions, he looked very conflicted. I'm not sure if you guys saw that at all or not either.
No, I see the same thing you're talking about, CJ. In fact, if you look at my most recent post on the Rogue Money site, if you go to roguemoney.net, CIRAC SITREP 46, where I talked about whether or not the administration was stepping back, or actually the SITREP 47 I posted just yesterday, where it seemed like there was some debate going on in the administration, if not some infighting. I talked about I posted a video of Trump's body language that was analyzed by a lady who does body language analysis. And she was looking at, Syria roundtable, Trump defeated. I think if you type in Trump body language analysis and type in those keywords, you'll see what I'm talking about on the page, CJ, or the audience will here shortly.
Okay.
If you scroll down to it underneath the video of Mattis there.
Oh, on the actual article, my bad.
Click on the extended post of the actual article.
There we go. Yeah.
47. It's below Ken's that was posted today.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah, and she talked about how this woman who does that analysis, how conflicted Trump looked, and you know how he seemed really reluctant to get more involved. Notwithstanding, you know, the tough guy talk about, hey, get ready, Putin, the missiles are coming, and they're new and smart and shiny, which I guess was a reference to the Storm Shadow missiles that the British fired from their Tornado jets, probably right after they took off from Cyprus, the air bases there. So, but what's clear at this hour is everything that was fired was done on a standoff basis. We don't have any evidence that any actual coalition, U.S., British, or French jets entered Syrian airspace at this hour. We believe they all fired from over the Med. There are some reports that the Tomahawks came in from the south, from Jordan, from that direction, possibly fired by either U.S. sub or U.S. ship in the Red Sea near Saudi Arabia. So that's another wrinkle in the attack plan. But overall, it's not particularly shocking, and it looks like they fired about twice as many missiles as they did last April in the attack on the Al-Sharat air base, which, as we recall, didn't do that much damage. I mean, the airbase was back operational in barely 24 hours.
Right.
So, and again, the Syrian Air Force doesn't appear to have been hit that hard. And, we don't have the word on the death toll yet as far as casualties among personnel, but most of these facilities seem to have been empty when they were struck about 3:30 to between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. local time. And the Syrian army, we already saw from Elijah J. McNair and others who have good sources in Damascus. He's a veteran journalist for Kuwait's Al Rai, that these Syrian army had been ordered to evacuate many of its barracks and disperse. So again, the impact appears to be, other than the civilian loss of life in Damascus, minimal.
W, I know earlier you had mentioned that you thought perhaps maybe it'd be more that they would get really close to this point, and more that they would just kind of, pause and say, okay, let's come to some type of reconciliation. What are your thoughts? This is a preliminary. Are we going to see something potentially happen again tomorrow night? I know daylight is coming up now in Syria. What are your thoughts, W? And I think you're muted. Okay. Are you guys still there? Can you guys hear me? Did I lose audio?
I can.
Okay, cool.
I'm here.
Okay, cool. So, Ken, go ahead. Why don't you jump into what are your thoughts, Ken?
Well, to be honest, I only got on the last 5 or so minutes. I assume we're talking about Syria. But the one thing that stands out to me is because leading up to yesterday and earlier, I was more of the feeling and impression that the information, especially that Russia's come out about who is really behind the fake, what appears to be at this point a fake chemical attack, is the fact that Britain and France are already full bore into this. And if the U.S. didn't get involved in it, then the potential for chaos could be much greater than if the U.S. took the lead and determined where the strikes were going to go.
Right. Correct. Yes. And W, I think you tried to come back on. Is your mic working again? Sorry.
Well, I turned my mic off, and I just now turned it back on. I was trying not to walk over Ken there. I think your observation on Britain and France is right on the cash. Trump had to be involved. He was kind of, at a certain level, it's face-saving for Britain, because they've gone out on this limb so far on the Skirple thing. And then they're the ones really pushing behind the scenes to make this all happen.
Yeah, W, I'm not to interrupt you, but my first thought when I saw that the British had been accused by the Russian Foreign Ministry, or at least the Defense Ministry formally, of being behind the White Helmets, which is a notorious GNGO, as I call it. It's a non-governmental organization that's been funded publicly by MI6 or through various cutouts. When I saw that, I thought that, man, maybe they're reading Harley Schlanger and LaRouche stuff in the Russian Defense Ministry, because they're basically naming the Brits as the primary culprit of this false flag campaign, and linking, as Deb Banks-Slayer or others noticed, explicitly linking the Skripal campaign, vilifying the Russians and saying that they poisoned these people with a nerve agent that's supposedly 10 times deadlier than VX, which didn't work, obviously, because Yulia Skripal is alive. And they say, well, somewhere at a British or military base or undisclosed location, because she's not being allowed to communicate with her relatives in Russia anymore, because what she said earlier embarrassed the British government. But it seems like this drumbeat has been established, whereby they're trying to link Russia, chemical weapons, Russia, chemical, Russia, nerve agent, even though we don't even know with the Duma attack if there was any nerve agent used. We don't have any evidence of it. The Russians haven't found any traces of it. The latest the French were saying before the strike yesterday was that Macron's government was claiming that there was a mixture of chlorine and other chemicals used. But again, the Organization for the Prevention of for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons inspectors have not even made it to the site. They were scheduled to arrive in Damascus, I believe, Friday. So, sun's coming up there Saturday morning, and they were supposed to be visiting the sites this weekend. So it's unclear if the strikes are going to interfere with that. But what is clear is that the U.S., British, and French did not want to wait for the evidence at all before they acted.
Yeah, I think that's the part that sticks with me also, is that certainly the pressure was on to make something happen and not telegraph your move too easily. Trump keeps talking about, he'll telegraph he's going to do something, but he doesn't want them to know the timing. And the thing that sticks with me, though, is that in the Q information, it was very clear, and I don't think it's even arguable, that from a Q perspective, Q team, which is Trump, that they were telegraphing that this was a false flag, part of a series of false flags, and that was pretty clear. To then turn around and act on information that within that Q meme is saying it's false flag does seem a bit over the top to me, and that just goes back to the pressure that was being applied to do something for whatever reason, or to piggyback in order to control, as Ken was saying, the outcome, or at least the targets that were chosen to minimize or keep this thing from blowing too far out of control. And, as I said earlier in the day, I expected us to go into the area and go eyebrow to eyebrow. I was thinking that there was a strong possibility of some kind of a initial punch like we did last year, where we kicked the trash can, a bunch of empty canisters. But I really didn't expect anything whole hog. And I think at some level, that's what we've got right now. There's some sites that we're, concerned about. We're going to shut those down. We've hit them. It's done. But, the other side of the coin is, because Trump was painted into a corner somewhat by his own words that he had to do something. My other concern is this: Putin has a constituency also, and he has face saving to do also. And if the Brits needed to do some face saving, if the French needed to do some face saving, okay, I get that. But so's Putin. Is he going to stand there and take it? Or is he going to strike out some way? I'm not as concerned about Assad. I'm concerned about, is Putin deciding that he has to do something to, show, and what would that look like? He may not act super directly like we just did. He might provide additional armaments or
to Iran.
Well, I think even Yemen.
Yeah, I think Yemen is an obvious point of pushback to inflict some pain indirectly on the U.S. by making it clear that the Houthis, who have been firing missiles into Saudi Arabia, almost on a daily basis now for the past week, and it's not been widely reported because the Saudis claim that they intercept the missiles, and they're not the most accurate. These, I think they're called Barkhan or volcano is in Arabic is what they're referred to. But basically, they're Scud-derived, probably North Korean technology missiles that are indigenous to Yemen in some sense because, they claim that they have Iranian parts in them, but those claims have not been substantiated. And frankly, the stuff Iran has already is probably much more accurate and longer range than these more simpler missiles, of a 70s or late 60s generation that they're firing at the Saudis. But even then, some of the Patriot missiles, about a week and a half ago, the Saudis tried to intercept one, and the Patriot missiles we sold to the Saudis, one of them just crashed into an apartment block and probably killed an Egyptian working in Saudi Arabia. So the Patriots don't work as advertised, and what we're seeing is a lot of fear and uncertainty on the Saudis' part that things could escalate. Their war in Yemen has not been going well, and this is one of the topics we've discussed extensively in telephone conversations with W. It's already dragged into its third year. It's a humanitarian disaster. It's bad for the PR image of the kingdom. There's only so much the Saudis bought and paid for friends in Washington, D.C. and London can do in terms of spin to make what they're doing to the Yemeni people look less horrific with the the starvation and the cholera epidemic there. And that's definitely where I expect some of the immediate answer to come from, because we saw the recent report, the Yemeni resistance, the Houthis were saying they had hit an Aramco refinery. And there is a very large refinery facility in Jizyan, close to the Red Sea coastline, that is extremely vulnerable, particularly if the Houthis were to get more accurate missiles that would not even follow a ballistic path like these Scud knockoffs that the Yemenis have been firing, but something more like a cruise missile that would just skim the wave tops and come in and hit with a very powerful warhead. So that's where I expect some of the pain to come. But I'm also not so sure that we will not see definitely a hardening of the Russian-Iranian alliance. In other words, the opposite outcome of what perhaps this strike was intended to do, which was to drive a wedge between the Russians and their Syrian hosts, because obviously the Russians we don't have any evidence they engaged U.S. aircraft or British aircraft. It's possible that the S-400 systems in Hamamim along the coast near Latakia could have lit up the British jets on radar and basically pinged them and said, hey, we can shoot you down right now if we wanted to, but we're not going to do it today, when they were launching their missiles over the Mediterranean. But we don't know for sure. That's unconfirmed at this time. What we do know is that the Russians had publicly stated before these strikes, a couple days before, via South Front and other outlets, that they had that picked up the RIA Novosti story, that they had provided 40 Panzer S-1 systems, which these are not the large, long-range SAMs like the S-400 that can shoot down a plane 200 miles away. These are point defense, shorter-ranged systems with basically Gatling guns and radars designed to engage targets that are coming in like cruise missiles. They're more for defending airfields and military bases, and these are spread all over Syria. And it's possible that there were joint Russian-Syrian crews operating tonight, shooting down a lot of the Tomahawks. The Syrian Air Defense claims they shot down 13 incoming missiles. We're not sure if they were Tomahawks or if they were the British Storm Shadow missiles, but they also shot down about a half dozen Israeli missiles that were fired at the Tias Air Base Sunday night. So what we're seeing, it seems like, is a stepped up Russian technical cooperation with the Syrians to try to assuage their anger over getting hit like this. And probably we'll see even more equipment transferred to the Syrians in the near future, things like Buk SAMs, so that, at least if a coalition jet does get shot down in the future over the Med, the Russians can point to the Syrians and say, well, it was a Syrian officer that pushed the button, even though obviously the allegation will be that it was a Russian.
Right.
Anytime a U.S. jet shot down. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, Ken, any thoughts on retaliation? What will Russia, what will Syria do next? Is this one of those things that, because they're reporting that they shot down majority of these, they were, actually kind of touting a little bit, saying, hey, you know what? We had some of our Syrian citizens up on the rooftops watching these things get shot out of the air. So, Ken, go ahead. Well,
I think you hit the nail on the head. Let's take in consideration all different factors that happen. One, Trump didn't jump to, obviously the Twitter war, but you always have to take his Twitter with a lot of, salt. He uses it primarily to throw something against the wall and watch for the reaction. The first night he comes out and calls Assad an animal, yada, yada, yada. Well, how many days has it been since then? 3, 4? And what's happened? Russia has had plenty of time, and as well as Syria, to pull out necessary armaments, military, etc., from certain places. 2, Russia took out its navy from the port. 3, Russia had enough time to go in to where the chemical attack took place to question the doctors. That's where they're getting a lot of the information, and they found British military and British intelligence there, captured all that. And over these last 3 or 4 days, how much back channel talking has been going on? We already know that firing Tomahawks against Russian S-400 and other defense bunkers are going to shoot most of them out of the air anyway. They're firing on places that really don't have a whole lot of military strategic use, and minimize everything. If you can control the area, then really what you're doing is you're making a show, saving faces, as James and W said, but without really causing any damage. The other thing you have to take into consideration too is a lot of this occurred. I don't know if you guys had a chance to check the article I wrote, but there were some major domestic things that were done today. And
huge.
The first thing,
huge.
Yeah, absolutely huge.
And
by the way,
again, let me interrupt for 1 second and just mention also there was a reason why Trump wanted to do this today, in part, and that was because this is the 32nd anniversary of the strike on Gaddafi that Reagan did. And so he wanted that momentum to kind of a remembrance, a tying to Gaddafi, that he's doing something, and then anything that Syria, Russia, anybody does to kind of step down, back from the brink is similar to what Reagan did. And he was looking for that, completion of the day. He kind of like in the Godfather movies where, one particular day they take care of all their problems. This was that big day today, Friday the 13th, for all the enemies. And then we're done, we're happy, and all that. I don't think that's the way it's going to work. But I apologize for interrupting, but I just wanted to put that in there.
You never know with the symbology that's going on. But one of the interesting things that came out is after the OIG report came out today, and the Democrats are now calling for all their paid Soros NGOs to have this huge national rally against Trump in case he fires Rosenstein and or Mueller. Well, what will hit the headlines much better than a war strike versus a bunch of clowns, parading in the streets?
That's a beautiful point. Yes.
So you've put a front page saying, well, people are not going to give a shit about a bunch of 49-year-olds like they were in DC for the Parkland shooting. A bunch of 49-year-old out of work people getting their Craigslist call to go rally in the streets. No,
but that brings up an interesting point, Ken. W, I'm sorry if I may interject about the cognitive dissonance of this whole Russiagate thing, because now all the Trump supporters can say, "Hey, look, he showed Putin who was boss. He stood up to him," and just like Pompeo the other day, the former CIA director, now nominee for Secretary of State, bragged to the Congress, "Hey, we killed hundreds of Russian mercenaries in Syria. Look how tough we are against the Russians. Way tougher than Obama ever was." So the whole Russia collusion thing is a total joke. Well, yes, it is a total joke, and it's always been a joke, but it's been a deep state, deadly, seriously sponsored joke and a lot of it, not to repeat what Harley and Lershpak say again, but the mask has sort of slipped off that a lot of this stuff is coming out of Great Britain. It was the British who arranged the false flag in Duma, and who have been sponsoring the white helmets the whole time, including with a lot of their fake videos where they're caught teaching kids how to, engage in convulsions and play with foaming at the mouth. And, some of the photographs that came out from Duma, which are absolutely incredible, where these gas canisters supposedly dropped from Assad's barrel bombing helicopters, land right on a mattress, punch a hole in the roof, but don't smash the bed. And a guy standing in front of it with a gas mask posing, next to this deadly chemical that could, very well contaminate him through the skin. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. But, that's, again, why they had to rush, get this strike launched. And it's possible that the Russians knew, okay, that the strike was imminent. So they went ahead and made the allegation today on a Friday before the weekend and basically called the British out. And hopefully we'll also see the Russian side maybe reveal some of the stuff they know intelligence-wise about the whole effort and what support Christopher Steele received from MI6, from his former colleagues, so-called ex-MI6 agent. It's funny because when you talk about Russians, it's always, there's no such thing as ex-KGB, but apparently there's such a thing as ex-MI6. And Steele, Sergei Skripal, certainly we know he worked for Orbis Business Intelligence in some capacity. We don't know how much money he was paid by Steele's associates, but we know his handler was a British MI6 agent named Pablo. The last name escapes me at the moment. I think it was Pablo Miller, an interesting Spanish first name, who was the handler of Sergei Skripal when he began working for British intelligence in the 1990s for money while he was with the GRU. GRU, the Russian military intelligence. And we know that Sergei was living in Salisbury in part to be close to his handler. But what we don't know yet for sure definitively is whether Sergei was the one who was acting as Steele's intermediary, calling people in Russia on the phone and basically getting all these lurid сказки, these tall tales about Trump and the hookers and the mattress and whatnot. And speaking of which, again, on Friday, what we're seeing is McClatchy, D.C., which has become a reliable disinfo outlet for pushing all of the Russiagate stuff, in part because it gets clicks, it gets circulated. I know for a fact that that's part of what drives the coverage is the mainstream media is in such financial disrepair and collapse that they push Russiagate in part for that reason. But I also because there are covert slush funds like Fusion GPS and other organizations probably linked to Soros that are paying off journalists. Natasha Bertrand of Business Insider is one of them suspected. Ken Delenian of NBC News, who's been caught doing stenography for the CIA, basically running his stories by Langley sources, trying to get them to approve what he's doing, apple polish for them. And some of the others, Scott Shane at the New York Times, who tried to do damage control in the WikiLeaks State Department dumps. I mean, we know who some of these journalists are. We don't know all the specifics and how much they're being paid, but we know that there's a payola system operating that's pushing a lot of this Anglo-American, British deep state originated propaganda, agitprop, to Americans and through our media. And of course, CNN, MSNBC, they're at the epicenter of it. But you also, McClatchy, they own a lot of newspapers in the U.S. We all know the newspapers are dying. They're in crisis. And, they've consistently pushed certain stories like about, that the FBI was supposedly investigating Alex Jones and InfoWars to see whether they were a part of the Russian collusion through Roger Stone. Of course, nothing ever came of that. They just throw the allegation out there, and that's all that needs to happen. So on this Friday, of course, right before the strikes, a few hours, in fact, probably 2 or 3 hours before, the McClatchy story breaks that the president's attorney, Michael Cohen, whom Mueller's people raided in violation of attorney-client privilege to obtain the documents about the Stormy Daniels and other payoffs to supposedly to other women that have nothing to do with Russian collusion whatsoever, unless, we don't know that Stormy Daniels is actually a Russian agent, the porn star. I mean, basically, the McClatchy story accused Michael Cohen of actually having gone to Prague when he said he didn't, and he'd never been to Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic, and that this is supposed to corroborate the Steele dossier, which claimed that he had this meeting with some Russian linked to the Kremlin, and they discussed how that they were going to hack the Democrats and pay some Romanian hackers. And of course, what's interesting about this is the whole story is not only is, Cohen sued BuzzFeed for libel for publishing the Steele dossier, and that lawsuit is still pending, but also that, the Steele dossier isn't even internally consistent. And in other words, at the time that, it was being put together, you had Guccifer 2.0 appear a few weeks after it was put together, claiming to be a Romanian, and they're claiming Michael Cohen is meeting with Romanians. Well, if you're colluding with the Russians, why do you even need the Romanian hackers as well? Why don't you just have Russian hackers?
Let me add
so it's all a big convoluted.
Yeah, let's get back to focus today's events and try to
one quick little item that I think is important, just to finish off what James was saying. The most important aspect of this whole dossier and going to the FISA court is that because the court doesn't give an opportunity for an opposing opinion from an opposing counsel, there's a higher standard required for that information that's presented in the FISA court setting, in essence, to protect whoever's the target. And so it has to have been vetted as true. And the trust there is that the agents presenting it and the agency presenting these facts before the court has proven beyond any doubt that the allegations, assertions in a FISA document presented to the court are true. That was never done in these. And that's the real crux of where the pushback is going to come against all those players, and especially McCabe, for going to the court with what amounts to totally unsubstantiated, unproven information as though it was true. But getting back to Syria, the situation there, I think what we have to look forward to now is what's next, and what's the exit plan. Trump didn't go into this attack campaign today with no plan for what's going to happen tomorrow and the rest of the week. And so, and he has a 10-day window from the 10th to the 20th that he has telegraphed through the queue, that is his keystone dates to kind of clear all of these things off the calendar, including, Iran next type of thing. So we still have 7 days ahead within that window. We're only at day 3. And the question is, what's next in this series of events related to Trump's overall Godfather-esque deal with the enemies, and Russia, Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Israel, all of that, with 7 more days to go. We're not all the way through this at all. We just started.
Well, getting back to Syria, and again, I apologize for the extended rant, but I was trying to connect the dots between the pressure that's being applied to Trump through, all this drumbeat and the military action he's taking to try to show that he can stand up to Putin and he's tough on Russia. But obviously, we see reports that I think there's going to be a hardening of the Russian position. I mean, we're already seeing, and this will be probably a subject of an upcoming article, that Moscow is threatening to cut off the titanium shipments to Boeing that they use for the Dreamliner airliners, and basically start punishing American companies more and hitting back over the sanctions that have had, an impact on the ruble in the last several days. I mean, Russian stock market went down. That doesn't really matter to anybody but the oligarchs. It's just paper wealth they have anyway. Russians don't invest in the stock market like Americans do. But the ruble impact is something Moscow cannot ignore. What's going to happen with oil prices going forward after this action? Well, we'll probably just see a blip if nothing else, because Syria is not a major oil producer. But clearly, if we see more extensive Houthi retaliation via Iran's proxies against the Saudis there, that could drive the oil price back up. That could do a lot of things to their economy. And certainly, I think we're going to see more threats from China to take more decisive action in support of the Russians. And finally, we have unconfirmed reports that, these are unconfirmed, I stress, that Russian Tupolev Tu-22 backfire bombers capable of carrying supersonic cruise missiles are landing at Hamadan Airfield Air Base in Iran and are being permitted to fly through there again. So instead of driving the wedge between Russia and Iran that these strikes are expected to do by a lot of the neocons, showing that, hey, Moscow can't protect Tehran, it can't protect Damascus, it's a worthless ally. I think it's going to bring them closer together.
Right.
Have the opposite effect.
Ken, real quick, politically, what are your thoughts on this? And it's one of the things that I hate, but it has to be considered in this. A couple of factors that I took away leading up to this was that he did go on that Twitter storm, and you mentioned that earlier when he said, get ready, bombs are coming in. And then he instantly got criticized because he's like, wait a minute, aren't you the one that sit there and criticize Obama for telegraphing when the strike? So then he backed up and he's like, well, we're going to walk through this carefully. We're going to see what's happening. And I take a little bit different twist in today's news cycle. It's kind of like dangling carrots. It's like, I'm prepared to do something that I know is going to affect my base and they're going to be upset about it. So let me dangle a few little carrots here and there, with the Inspector General report. We're going to go after them. I'm going to tell Sessions to back off the marijuana states, and, they can do what they want, just trying to a little bit, so I hate to look at it that it was kind of a political angle, knowing that what he was going to be doing tonight, but I just can't help thinking about that. So Ken, your thoughts?
Well, I honestly don't think it's a political angle. I think that, like I said, whatever you get on Twitter, take it with a grain of salt. It's not really what's going on. He flip-flops on there because he tries to control the media. He tries to control the narrative. He'll throw something out there totally outrageous, and the media will spend the next 6 hours talking about it. And that's what he wants them to talk about while he's doing something else behind the scenes. So I don't even worry about the Twitter garbage. My thing, like I said, just from observations, the fact of the matter is that Britain and France, for some stupid reason, probably for their own domestic problems, are desperately trying to get involved in a war that they shouldn't get involved in. And I think that's pushed Trump's hand to have to do it tonight. Because if you think about it, by doing this strike, what can Trump do the next thing? he's going to come tomorrow and say, okay, let's get cooler heads. Let's talk with Putin. Let's talk with Britain. Now, all of a sudden, Britain and France's hands are tied because they can't really do anything without the U.S. giving the acceptance. U.S. has taken the lead on this. I think we're going to see also this could be a covert thing where Trump is telling Putin, because, just like we were going to pull out of Syria, Russia's been pulling a whole bunch out of Syria. They stopped doing a lot of their air reconnaissance. They've stopped doing a lot of that. This may be where Trump needs Russia back in there to hold the line. Otherwise, who knows what Europe's going to do, because Europe is suddenly becoming a loose cannon all across the board. There's so much going on behind the scenes you can never see. But the thing with the political, no, I think the political and the Syria bombing are completely different. I think what you saw earlier today was, from what the article I wrote, and I was listening to, I don't know if you guys listened to James Corsi or Jerome Corsi. Mm-hmm. He now has a YouTube channel where he spends about either every day or every 2 days with a whole group of like 400 people going over the QAnon stuff. They're traveling around, et cetera, et cetera. But he does live
before or after he's promoting his book and signing his book. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
He's been doing that lately as well. But the point is that one of the things that you're finding is there's a lot of, if you can take out some of the bias in there. I'm not really big on Jerome Corsi and his worship of Israel and things like that, but that's where I got the start for that article I wrote about Scooter Libby. The Scooter Libby pardon was like a signal to everybody, and to Mueller especially. You know what? Your days of chasing around after going after indictments of anybody that has nothing to do with Russian interference is done. I'm just going to pardon them up and down. It's going to end this investigation very quickly.
Right, because they'll scream in Congress, and what the heck are they really going to do? Are they really going to have impeach him? They don't have the votes. Nobody has the votes.
There's something else that sort of went under the radar that I don't remember his last name, but he was a ally with Flynn. His name is Cohen Weebekitz or something like that. But he got kicked out when Flynn got kicked out under the Obama administration. He got kicked out too. Well, Trump this week just put him as an advisor in the DOJ.
Yes, that's important. Let me
military intelligence officer inside the DOJ. He's going after Rosenstein.
His background was military intelligence, and so that's why him and this group that's the Q group is military intelligence, and so that's why him being over there at the DOJ, eyes and ears and ready to take action is so critical. Let me just.
The name is Ezra Cohen Watnick, gentlemen.
Watnick,
Cohen
that was
Watnick,
yeah. Real quick, let me finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead.
The key thing about the Scooter Libby is, who was Scooter Libby's lawyer? Victoria Tonsing,
right,
wife of Joe Diva, whatever his name is.
Yeah.
Genova. He's on Fox.
The two allies who Trump had tried to get on his team, but they are probably working with him as they can on the side, getting them the information. Those guys know everything. And plus, of course, who does Victoria Tonsing also represent? William Campbell, Uranium One.
Yep.
So all of this stuff is happening. Boom, 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 boom. I think what Mueller did by going after Cohen was a last-ditch effort to try to scare and intimidate Trump, and then Trump just played the cards today. Boom, 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 boom. It's over. The Mueller thing is over. That's why I think the Syria thing is a separate. It's probably a diversion, in my opinion, for world foreign policy rather than to try to placate. Because guess what else happened this week? Paul Ryan is going to step down and not run for re-election. Paul Ryan, the globalist shill, who's tried and been to act like he's a conservative, suddenly decides that he's had enough. I think you're going to start seeing even more as we get to the 2018 election. So many of these guys are just going to quit. because the amount of evidence that they have backed up now coming towards, why one of the things that a lot of the base has been asking, why aren't we seeing indictments? Why aren't we seeing indictments? Well, we could have indictments here in March, April, May. But wouldn't it be better if we had them in August, September, leading up to the election of all these liberal hacks?
Great point. Gentlemen, let's do this. Let's go around the horn. 5 minutes, closing thoughts. And W, I'll start with you, and then I'll go James, and then we'll wrap up with you, Ken. Is that cool?
Sure.
All right, go for it.
My main concern here is that looking out into the future, let's go 6 months out. In the OPEC meeting that took place down in Houston here a couple weeks ago, behind the scenes, the deals that were being done, the Saudis were doing deals based on a internal conversation amongst those people that are doing these very large long-term contracts. Oil hovering around $100 a barrel in the mid-fall, late fall of this year. So they were telegraphing what they think is going to happen in the Mideast. They don't see this calming back down or getting to normal. Those kind of prices would reflect possibly attacks on oil tankers, pipelines, or those states, those producers. Now, another thing that happened this last week that virtually went completely under everybody's radar, the general who has been kind of running Libya for the last year or so, well-liked guy, he had a heart attack. And so he's up in, I believe, France right now getting medical treatment. And it's very questionable whether or not he'll survive. That could further destabilize Libya. And we had strikes on ISIS, air strikes.
An Egyptian member of parliament actually announced that General Khalifa Haftar, the head of the Libyan National Army, died in Paris after suffering a stroke earlier this week.
There you go.
And that is the eastern part of Libya where Egypt and Russia have a strong influence.
Yes. And then we start looking at all of these various events there. The Mideast is continuing to dissemble and unravel. So even these strikes, and I think Ken makes an outstanding point here, that in part, this was maybe the exact opposite of what people think. It was sort of intended to keep Russia there because the two big dogs, this is what I said in the meeting, in the interview this morning, the way you keep stability there is with the U.S. and Russia remaining engaged and present right there, eyebrow to eyebrow. As soon as either one of us lets go of the rope and backs away, the region really does go into some kind of much greater chaos. But at the end of the day, I think that's what's going to happen, and both the powers will be there. They won't be able to take direct action, U.S. against Russia, vice versa, without it really going into a mad policy. So what they're going to do, there might be a sniping event like we just did today. But the reality is that we're going to work very hard not to see any Russian soldiers be killed with any U.S. Direct action and vice versa. And if Israel wants to make strikes in Syria, then, or ISIS, an extension of Israel in the U.S., then Syria and Iran and Hezbollah, their proxy, and even Hamas have free reign to go back and strike at anybody that strikes at them. It's a return fire type of a policy. But for the most part, I do not see the U.S. and Russia directly engaging other than a Mexican hat dance. They just can't. If they do, it's going to blow up into something way, way, way worse. And we can't allow even France or Britain to suck us into that. And that's the danger for Trump, that anything could happen. There's some odd, bizarre thing. And because of our NATO agreements, we're sucked into something I think they want to. In a deep state sense, the other thing is this. If prosecutions are going to happen here in the U.S., Trump is using foreign and domestic in a kind of a ping pong back and forth, the way Russia and China were using North Korea and the Mideast back and forth to stretch us during the Obama administration, Trump is going to use a similar tactic using the foreign activities, policy, military, and domestic action to play against his enemies, both in the media and political enemies, to keep them off balance. And so using Syria on the same day that he's doing these huge domestic actions to send a message. Remember, the whole point of Libby was that he was prosecuted by a special prosecutor. Those charges came from that environment, the same as Mueller. And so it was really a very direct attack on the legitimacy of the information Mueller's using for these attempts at prosecutions. And Mueller has real issues. Besides, the last thing I'll say is that besides the issues related to Uranium One and the money that Mueller would have gotten from that and the activities there, Mueller has a real problem with being part of the deep state pedophile issue in protecting the pedophile trade, both, well, in several places, but especially coming out of Southeast Asia and Cambodia specifically. And that's kind of a story for another day, but they've got him by the short hairs. He wants to come out and do anything. Any day that Trump wants to take him out, he can take him out for cause and lay him bare in the media. They wanted Mueller there for this period of time to essentially vet Trump out, go whale away, find the worst you can find. And when they don't find anything, Trump comes across as more pristine to go forward and do the rest of the battles he wants to do. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, great, W. Thank you. James, go right ahead. Closing thoughts.
Yeah, my closing thought is I'm not sure I entirely agree with the whole Q thing. I mean, I'm not maybe as skeptical of it as V, but I will tell you that I've been a bit dubious of a lot of the Q stuff. I mean, I think that there's very interesting material that's put out that seems to match some events that are happening, and maybe it's a psyop, maybe it's something really elaborate, and the esoteric nature of a lot of what it's put out. But I try not to get too much into it, and I try, like Ken, not to pay too much attention to the tweets and what's said, and focus more on what the actions actually are. And what we've seen tonight is a very limited strike. It made the point worse than the strike on the Sharad Air Base after the chemical false flag at Khan Sheikhoun a year ago. But we didn't see a big confrontation between the U.S. and Russia. The British and French, their role was very limited. Their bark is obviously much louder than their bite. The British deep state is still playing all these games and pushing, and is shocked that anybody would accuse them of something so dastardly as to have their GNGO white helmets people fake a chemical attack, or conduct a real chemical attack alongside the fake one in Douma, in south of Damascus. But obviously, I think that we're going to see even more U.S.-Russia talks in the days ahead. Russia's going to step up its rhetoric in terms of punching back and inflicting some pain with counter-sanctions against the U.S. We'll see more explicit calls for dumping the United States dollar and for cooperation, hardening Russian foreign policy alongside China, and for support for Iran from the Eurasianists, Dugin and those guys. So I think that that's what we're pretty much going to see more of the same is what I'm expecting in the days and weeks ahead. But as far as the financial stuff goes, I think people should expect oil price volatility, maybe more cryptocurrency beatdowns and dumps, and watch for more anti-dollar actions.
10-second comment. 10-second little thought.
Go for it.
Remember, an attack on Syria is an attack. Attack on Saudi Arabia is an attack on the dollar. If Putin really wants to get back at us for this, he allows Yemen to have more of whatever they need, and even Iran, to stress us there with Saudi Arabia. And a higher oil price is not good for the dollar at this point in time.
And that's where I expect the blow to fall. And I don't see, if we don't see attacks on American troops in eastern Syria by Hezbollah-linked operatives, Iraqis, Shia, and et cetera, I do expect that we're going to see a lot more dead Saudis and more Saudi troops and missiles hitting Saudi Arabia in the weeks and months to come. That's where I do expect retaliation and pain to be inflicted for what the U.S. has done tonight.
Right. Very good. Ken.
The one important thing I always try to look at in all of this is that I'm pretty sure, I would say 95%, that Trump knows that Russia is not the enemy. Russia knows that Trump administration is not the enemy. The enemy is the intelligence services of MI6, the CIA, and the Mossad, period. So really, a lot of these things are being done in the aspect of trying to destroy their capability of doing this mercenary type war. The one thing that stands out is the Russians immediately sent in troops to Duma. Well, you know what? Wasn't Duma one of the areas that was still not completely solidified in Syria?
Yeah. Yes.
Now all of a sudden Russia's in there, and the ISIS and British intelligence and all the NGOs, they're out. So what it did is it allowed Russia to accelerate and clean up the area. So there are a lot of different things around this. In the end, we're not going to really know the whole chapter because most of it's done in the back channels. I also think things like the most recent kicking out of the tit for tat, kicking out of diplomats, both from St. Petersburg and from the U.S., Russian and U.S. Well, that's a great thing for both sides, because how many of those individuals were trustworthy? We know that in most State Departments, embassies, etc., the CIA has agents running their own operations out of those departments. So why not close them down? It works for both sides. Finally, let's take a look at the titanium threat against Boeing. Boeing is the deep state. They're part of the military-industrial complex. I think this is the allowance of that would be a great benefit to Trump, because what's the one thing they got to do? Somehow, some way, they got to cut off the money of the deep state and the military-industrial complex. By doing that, then all of a sudden, they have the capability, the Soroses of the world and whoever's working with them have less capability to do these type of attacks or divisions amongst the attempt at peace.
Boy, those are all such great points, Ken. I'm going to steal some of them.
Be my guest.
Yeah, absolutely. And
I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that, when guys come up with, I think, somewhat original information like that, and Ken, that's just, flesh and blood hath not shown this to you. I'm just telling you, those are all so right on the cash, because as I've said all along, this is really a deep state war that Trump is having, and CIA and British Intel and Mossad are behind those players that Trump is having to come up against. That's the war. That's the real war. So, and for the same for Russia. So, yeah, outstanding points.
Yeah, and one last thing I want to say about Q.
Yes.
I suspect a couple of things with QAnon. I think the QAnon is military intelligence. They're doing it for a couple of reasons. One, by having this sort of board channel discussion, what they're doing is they're keeping the base focused, because you know how the American psyche is. If something exciting doesn't happen for 3 days, and we forget about it. It could be World War III. Okay, the bombs are drawn. Who cares? That's just the way Americans are today. Second, I think a lot of these drops are not necessarily supposed to tell us everything, but think about how many people are now researching, discussing, finding these niches, finding this information that normally people wouldn't look, because they're getting one little clue, and a lot of us are coming up with things that are revealing the truth, where it doesn't necessarily have to be dropped from somebody from on high.
Right. Yep. Great point.
Q is valid. So,
yeah, absolutely. And one really quick thing, I want to make sure to thank all of our listeners in the chat room. I really appreciate everyone tuning in tonight. I'm not going to go over any commentary regarding everything that the guys did. They did a terrific job. W, Ken, and James, thank you for joining in. I do just want to add just this really quick, getting a lot of either messages and posts in regards to the difference in opinions from our guests, whether it's London Paul, Ken, James W., Harley Schlanger. And to me, those debates, those conversations in terms of difference in opinions are very important. I don't think that we would be doing our audience any type of justice of strictly having one based opinion and sticking to that. It's good to have a variation. We don't have to have a collective thought on all of us agreeing on certain things. So I just want to put that out there because we do get some of that feedback that, oh, so-and-so said this and so-and-so believes in Q and so-and-so doesn't. That's okay. Form your own opinion, do your own research because it's still very viable and it's very important to have differences in opinion. So, and I think that we could probably all agree to that.
100%.
Amen.
All right. We're very good. Well, W, Ken, and James, thank you so much for being on tonight. I really appreciate it. To our audience, thank you so much. This is CJ, W, Ken, and James, and we're signing off. Take care, everyone.
Night.